the carpenter's hands. The scent of pine sawdust hung thick in the air of Matthew Bennett's workshop, a scent as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. It clung to his flannel shirt, settled in the creases of his work-worn jeans, and perfumed the dreams he whispered into the grain of every plank he touched. Sunlight streamed through the grimy window panes, illuminating dust motes, dancing like tiny spirits above his workbenchy bench. His grandfather had built from a single oak felled in 1955. Matthew ran his hands over the surface of a black walnut dining table he'd spent 3 weeks crafting. His fingers traced the intricate dovetail joints, each one a testament to patience, each groove a map of his journey. The table wasn't just furniture, it was a promise. A promise that something ordinary could become extraordinary under the right hands. His hands calloused, nicked, and stained with years of labor told their own story. The thin white scar across his left knuckle from a chisel slip at 17. The permanent indentation on his right palm from gripping a hammer for 25 years. The dust ground so deep into his cuticles that no amount of scrubbing could erase it. At 42, Matthew was the keeper of a legacy. His grandfather, Samuel Bennett, had built this workshop in 1962 with his own 2 hands, hammering nails into the frame while his wife hung laundry on the line and baby Matthew's father crawled in the grass. Samuel had carved his initials into the foundation beam, SB 1962. Matthew's father, Thomas, had followed suit, turning out sturdy oak cabinets that cradled Cedar Ridge's finest china and rocking chairs that had suited generations of Koliki babies. Thomas had added his own mark beside his father's, TB 1987. Now, Matthew stood alone in the workshop, the weight of 3 generations pressing down on his shoulders like an unplaned timber. Outside, the October wind rattled the loose shingles, a sound that had once been comforting, like a lullaby. Now it felt like a warning. He lived in a faded blue clapboard house, 2 blocks away with his wife, Clara, and their 7-year-old daughter, Sophie. Clara taught kindergarten at Cedar Ridge Elementary, her income patching the holes left by Matthew's sporadic commissions. Sophie, with her gap-toothed smile and perpetually paint-splattered overalls, loved to help in the workshop, sweeping sawdust with a child-sized broom and inspecting Matthew's work with solemn concentration. But lately, the bills had piled up like unplaned lumber. Property taxes on the house and workshop, Sophie's braces, scheduled for next month, the truck's transmission, which groaned like a dying animal every time Matthew shifted gears. He took every job that came, his way-fixing porch steps for Mrs. Gable, building bookshelves for the library, even crafting a lifeguard stand for the town pool. Yet the money vanished as fast as he earned it, swallowed by the gaping maw of necessity. On a crisp October morning, Matthew was sanding the walnut tabletop when the mail truck rattled up the gravel driveway. He wiped his hands on his denim apron, leaving behind faint smudges of wood stain, and walked outside, boots crunching fallen leaves. Among the flyers, for Tony's Pizza, 241 Tuesdays, and Miller's Hardware Full Sale, was an official-looking envelope from the Cedar Ridge Municipal Office. His stomach tightened. Official mail rarely brought good news. He tore it open, the words blurred before his eyes. Notice of eminent domain. The property located at 312 Maple Street, including the workshop structure, is hereby appropriated for the development of the Cedar Ridge Commerce Center. You have 60 days to vacate the premises. The walnut table slipped from his grasp. It hit the concrete floor with a hollow crack, splintering a corner. Matthew stared at the notice, then at the ruined table. 60 days. 60 days to dismantle 30 years of his family's life. Without the workshop, he had no business. without business, no income. The walls of the workshop seemed to close in around him, the scent of pines suddenly suffocating. He sank to his knees, the concrete cold beneath him, and ran his fingers over the splintered edge of the table. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Wood remembers, son. Every cut, every scar, every loving touch stays in the grain. Make sure your hands leave something worth remembering. What would his grandfather think of this? Of losing the place where Samuel had taught him to wield a hammer, where Thomas had shown him how to read the grain like a map. The workshop wasn't just a building. It was a living archive of Bennett history. That night, Matthew sat at the kitchen table long after Clara and Sophie had gone to bed. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant hoot of an owl. He traced the grain of the oak tabletop, his father's handiwork, and thought of his grandfather's words. When life knocks you down, boy, check what's beneath you. Might be solid ground to build on. But all Matthew felt was quicksand. The notice lay on the table, crisp and unforgiving. He picked it up, reading the words again. Cedar Ridge Commerce Center. He pictured it a sprawling parking lot, a chain pharmacy, a fast food joint with a garish sign, all replacing the workshop where Samuel had whittled toys for neighborhood children, where Thomas had built Clara's hope chest as a wedding gift. Clara found him there at 2 a.m., his head in his hands. "Matt," she whispered, placing a mug of tea in front of him, "you'll wear holes in the oak." He looked up, his eyes read. "How am I going to fix this? Cla, we lose the house. Sophie's school. Everything." She sat beside him, her hand covering his. "We'll figure it out. We always do." He shook his head. "Not this time. This isn't a broken transmission or a slow month. This is the end." Clara's voice was firm. "No, it's a change. A big one, scary one, but not the end. Remember when we thought we'd lose the house after Dad got sick? We sold your truck, worked extra shifts. We survived." Matthew sighed. "That was different. We had options. Now, now we have options too," she insisted. "Maybe it's time to think bigger, to stop being just the carpenter and start being Matthew Bennett, the artist, the businessman." He almost laughed. "Businessman? Clara, I can barely balance my checkbook." "Then learn," she said softly. Horace Whitmore started with nothing but a beat-up truck. Look at him now. Horace Whitmore. See the ridges? Only Millionaire, a man who'd built a trucking empire from a single Ford pickup, hauling scrap metal and lumber before expanding into a fleet that crisscrossed Ohio. Matthew had built. Horace, a custom cherrywood desk, years ago, a piece so intricate it had taken 6 months. Horace had called it a masterpiece and paid him double his usual rate. But approaching Horace felt like scaling Mount Everest in flip-flops. What would a man like that want with a struggling carpenter? The next morning, Matthew drove to Main Street and parked outside the Grind, the local diner where old-timers gathered for coffee and gossip. He needed airspace, a reminder that the world hadn't ended, even if his hat. As he pushed open the diner door, the smell of bacon and brewing coffee wrapped around him like a worn quilt. In the corner booth sat Horace Whitmore. At 78, Horace wore flannel shirts and work boots, not suits. His hands, though wrinkled, were still strong, the hands of a man who'd never stopped working. He was nursing a cup of black coffee, reading the Cedar Ridge Gazette with a frown. Matthew hesitated, then slid into the booth opposite him. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore." Horace looked up, his eyes sharp as chisels. Matthew, heard you make the finest furniture in 3 counties. What brings you to my corner of purgatory? His voice was gravelly, like rocks tumbling in a stream. Matthew swallowed. I lost my workshop. Eminent domain. They're building a strip mall where my grandfather's shop stands. Horace's expression didn't change, but he pushed a cup of coffee toward Matthew. Strip mall, of course. Cedar Ridge needs another dollar store like it needs a hole in the head. He sipped his coffee. So what's your plan? Matthew laughed bitterly. Plan? I don't have a plan. I've got 60 days to figure out how to feed my family without a roof over my tools. Horace set his cup down. Son, I started with nothing but that pickup truck and a load of scrap metal. Hold junk for farmers, hold lumber for builders. One day, I'm hauling old bricks from a demolished factory, and I realized something. He leaned forward. I wasn't just hauling things, I was hauling value. From where it wasn't needed to where it was. That's the secret of business, Matthew. Moving value. Matthew stared at him. But how do I turn that into rent? Into groceries? Horace pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled on a napkin. 1. Stop seeing wood as wood. See it as stories waiting to be told. 2. Find a stage, a place where people can see your stories. 3. Charge what it's worth, not what you need. He slid the napkin across the table. You're a carpenter, Matthew, but you're also a storyteller. Every table you build holds the laughter of families. Every chair cradles dreams. People don't buy furniture. They buy legacy. Start selling that. Matthew folded the napkin, his hands trembling. Where do I even start? Horace stood tossing a few bills on the table. You know, old man Henderson's barn out on Route 9? Been empty since his wife passed. Go see him. Tell him Horace sent you. On Matthew, he paused at the door. Don't let the world tell you what you're worth. You decide. Matthew spent the next week in a fog. He repaired the broken walnut table, but his heart wasn't in it. The joints felt stiff, the surface dull. Clara tried to lift his spirits. Maybe this is a sign, Matt. A chance to start fresh. To be more than just the carpenter. More, he'd snapped. Clara, I am the carpenter. It's all I know. But Horace's words echoed in his mind. See it as stories waiting to be told. One rainy afternoon, he drove to Henderson's barn. It was a cavernous, weathered structure leaning like a tired old man. Weeds choked the driveway, and the red paint had faded to a dull pink. Mr. Henderson, a stooped man with cloudy eyes and a threadbare cardigan, met him at the door. Horace said you might come by, Henderson rasped, his voice like dry leaves. Said you're good with wood. Matthew explained his situation. I need a space to work, to build, to show people what I do. I can't pay much rent up front, but I'll fix this place up, make it shine. And when I sell something, you get a cut. Henderson studied him. My Eleanor loved this barn, said it had good bones. He coughed. You fix it up. Make it something she'd be proud of. 6 months rent free. After that, we talk percentages. Matthew's throat tightened. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this. As he drove home, the rain slowed. Sunlight broke through the clouds, gilding the wet fields. For the first time in weeks, Matthew felt a flicker of something other than despair. Hope. That night, he spread Horace's napkin on the kitchen table. Clara read it aloud, her voice soft. 1. Stop seeing wood as wood. See it as stories waiting to be told. 2. Find a stage, a place where people can see your stories. 3. Charge what it's worth, not what you need. She looked at Matthew. So what's the story, Matt? What's the first tale you'll tell? Matthew thought of the ruined walnut table, of his grandfather's hands, of Sophie sweeping sawdust. He picked up a pencil and sketched on the napkin's edge. A table shaped like an open book, its surface flowing like pages, its legs carved with vines and birds. The storyteller's table, he whispered, for families who gather to share their lives. Clara smiled. I love it. But how will people know? How will they find you? Matthew hadn't thought that far. I don't know. Clara's eyes lit up. What if you show them? What if you document the process? The story behind the story. He frowned. Like what? A video. Exactly, she said. Sophie's got that old tablet. We could film you working, talking about the wood, the design, the meaning. Post it online. People love seeing how things are made. Matthew shook his head. Clara, I'm a carpenter. You're a storyteller, she corrected gently. And storytellers need an audience. The next morning, Matthew arrived at the barn at dawn. The air smelled of damp earth and old hay. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, casting spotlights on the dusty floor. He walked the length of the space, imagining it filled with his work. He spent the day clearing debris, hauling out rotten hay, sweeping decades of dust from the rafters. By evening, the barn felt lighter, breathing easier. As he looked up, his phone buzzed, a text from Clara. Sophie asked if they built her a princess castle for her dolls. I told her, the world's her castle. Matthew smiled. He looked at the barn, now quiet in the twilight. It wasn't just a workshop anymore. It was a blank page, and he was ready to write. The first chapter of his new life began not with a hammer, but with a story. And in Cedar Ridge, stories were worth more than gold. 3 weeks later, the barn was unrecognizable. Matthew had repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and installed workbenches along one wall. The air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. In the center of the space stood the storyteller's table, its surface smooth as silk, its legs carved with intertwining vines and birds in flight. Clara had set up a small camera on a tripod. Ready? She asked. Matthew nodded, his hands trembling slightly. He'd rehearsed what to say, but the words felt clumsy on his tongue. Action, Clara whispered. Matthew took a deep breath. This is black walnut, he began, running his hand over the table. It came from a tree that stood on Henderson's farm for over 100 years. It weathered storms, droughts, the Great Depression. It held the weight of snow in winter and the songs of birds in spring. He paused, his voice growing stronger. When I work with wood, I listen. This tree told me it wanted to be more than lumber. It wanted to be a gathering place, a place where families share meals, stories, dreams. So I carved it into an open book. Each page represents a chapter in a family's life. He looked directly into the camera. This isn't just a table. It's a legacy, and it's for sale for $5,000. Clara stopped the recording. That was perfect, Matt. He shook his head. $5,000. Who would pay that? Someone who understands value, she said firmly. Now, let's post it. The next day. Matthew was sanding a headboard when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Holla. Matthew Bennett, this is Eleanor Vance from Columbus. I saw your video, The Storyteller's Table. Matthew's heart raced. Yes. I'd like to buy it, she said. Can you deliver it next week? He almost dropped the phone. You ... You want to buy it? I want to buy it, she repeated. And I'd like to commission a dining set to match. My husband and I are celebrating our 30th anniversary. We want something ... meaningful. Matthew's voice caught. I'd be honored. After hanging up, he sank onto a stool, tears streaming down his face. Clara rushed in. What happened? He looked up, grinning. I sold it. And I got a commission. Clara hugged him tightly. I told you, Matt, your stories are worth telling. 1 month later, the barn buzzed with activity. Matthew had hired 2 young carpenters, Jake, a recent high school graduate with a natural talent for wood turning, and Mia, an art student with an eye for design. Together, they worked on commissions. A rocking chair for a newborn baby, a bookshelf for a retired teacher, a bed frame for a young couple's first home. Each piece came with a story, filmed by Clara and posted online. The videos gained traction. People from Cleveland, Pittsburgh, even Chicago reached out. Matthew raised his prices, and people paid. They weren't just buying furniture. They were buying a piece of Cedar Ridge, a piece of Matthew's heart. One evening, as he locked up the barn, Horace Whitmore pulled into the driveway. Matthew, Horace said, stepping out of his truck. Heard you're doing well. Matthew smiled. Thanks to you. Horace walked around the barn, examining the work in progress. You've got a gift, son, not just for woodworking, but for seeing what others miss. He stopped at the storyteller's table, now displayed prominently. This piece ... It's more than wood. It is so. Matthew nodded. I'm starting to understand what you meant. About moving value, about stories. Horace clapped him on the shoulder. You're on your way, Matthew? But remember, success isn't just about making money. It's about making a difference. As Horace drove away, Matthew looked at the barn, glowing softly in the twilight. He thought of his grandfather, his father, Sophie sweeping sawdust. He thought of Clara filming his stories. He thought of the future, stretching before him like a wide plank of wood, full of possibilities. The carpenter's hands had built more than furniture. They built a new life, one story at a time. The grain of truth. The barn at dawn was a cathedral of light and sawdust. Sunbeams pierced the newly repaired roof, illuminating dust motes, dancing like tiny fairies above Matthew's workbench. The air smelled of fresh-cut oak, lemon oil, and possibility. In 6 weeks, this cavernous space had transformed from a forgotten relic into a humming workplace where stories took shape in wood and purpose. Matthew ran his hand over the surface of a cherrywood headboard destined for a couple in Chicago. The grain flowed like a river, deep and he-she, whispering secrets of the tree it once was. He'd sourced the cherry from an old orchard being cleared outside town, trees that had borne fruit for 50 years before succumbing to blight. Now they would cradle dreams. Mr. Bennett, Jake's voice broke his reverie. The 19-year-old apprentice stood holding a tablet, his face alight with excitement. We've got another order. From New York, this time. Matthew wiped his hands on a rag. Let me guess. Another storyteller's table. Jake grinned. Better. A whole dining set. 6 chairs, a buffet, the table. They saw your video about the walnut tree and want something with history. Matthew felt a surge of pride, quickly tempered by anxiety. When do they need it? 8. We eat. Jake bit his lip. A-N-D. They want it delivered to Manhattan? Matthew whispered, that's a 300-mile trip with custom furniture. Clara appeared from the office area, her eyes bright. We can do it, Matt. We've got Mia finishing the rocking chair for the Columbus Hospital, and Jake's almost done with the library bookshelves. We'll schedule it. Matthew looked around the barn. Tools hung neatly on pegboard walls. Work benches held projects in various stages of completion. In one corner, Mia was carving intricate floral patterns into a hoop chest. In another, Jake was sanding a set of ladderback chairs. The space buzzed with energy, but Matthew felt the weight of it all. Clara, he said quietly, we're growing too fast. What if we lose the essence of what we do? What if it becomes just production? She touched his arm. We won't, because you won't let us. Every piece still has your hands on it. Your story. He wasn't so sure. 2 weeks later, the pressure was mounting. Matthew worked 12-hour days, his hands aching, his back stiff. The New York Commission required exotic woods ebony from Africa, teak from Southeast Asia materials he'd never worked with. Each plank cost more than his monthly mortgage. One evening, as he struggled to join 2 pieces of ebony that refused to align, Horace Whitmore appeared in the barn doorway. Having trouble? Horace asked, his voice soft. Matthew sighed, setting down his tools. This would ... It's unforgiving. One mistake, and it's ruined, and it costs a fortune. Horace picked up a scrap of ebony, turning it in the light. Beautiful, isn't it? Dark as midnight. Strong as iron, but brittle if you force it. He met Matthew's eyes, kind of like success. Matthew frowned. What do you mean? You're forcing growth, son. Trying to be everything to everyone. That's a recipe for splinters. Horace gestured around the barn. You've got good people here. Trust them. Teach them. But don't lose yourself in the process. Matthew looked at Jake and Mia, working intently. I hired them to help, but I find myself hovering, correcting, micromanaging. Because you're afraid, Horace said simply. Afraid they won't care like you do. Afraid they'll miss the story in the wood. He was right. Matthew had spent years honing his craft, learning to listen to the wood, to understand its grain, its history. How could he teach that in weeks? The next morning, Matthew gathered Jake and Mia at the workbench. On it lay 3 pieces of wood: pine, oak, and the precious ebony. Today, Matthew began, we're not building, we're listening. He picked up the pine. This is pine. Soft, light, easy to work with. It comes from trees that grow fast, straight toward the sun. It's forgiving. Like a good friend. He handed it to Jake. What do you feel? Jake closed his eyes. It's light, warm, like it wants to be useful. Matthew nodded. Now the oak. He passed the heavy plank to Mia. Oak grows slow, endures storms. It's stubborn, proud. What do you hear? Mia ran her fingers over the grain. Strength, patience, like it's seen things. Finally, Matthew picked up the ebony. And this ebony grows in harsh conditions. It develops its density slowly, over decades. It's rare, precious, but it resists change. It breaks if you push too hard. He looked at his team. Every piece of wood has a story. Every piece has a purpose. Our job isn't to force it into something it's not. It's to help it become what it was meant to be. He set down the ebony. Jake, you're working on the dining chairs. Used oak. It's strong, dependable. Mia, the buffet needs elegance. Use the cherry. It's warm, inviting. I'll handle the ebony tabletop. It needs patience. Jake and Mia exchanged glances, then nodded. For the first time, Matthew saw not just employees, but artisans. 1 month later, the New York dining set was complete. Matthew had spent nights polishing the ebony table until it gleamed like a dark mirror. The chairs, crafted by Jake from solid oak, felt sturdy yet graceful. Mia's cherrywood buffet featured delicate inlay work depicting vines and birds. The day before delivery, Matthew received an email from the client, Eleanor Vance. Matthew, my husband and I are so excited, but we have a request. Could you deliver it personally? We'd love to hear the story behind each piece. Matthew hesitated. A trip to Manhattan meant closing the barn for 2 days. Lucy and Kumi. But Clara insisted. This is huge, Matt. Think of the exposure. So they loaded the truck. Matthew, Clara, Jake, and me and drove east Manhattan. The Vances lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline of steel and glass. The space was minimalist, cold. Eleanor Vance, woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a warm smile, greeted them. Matthew, Clara, welcome. And this must be your team. As they unloaded the furniture, Eleanor's husband, Richard, examined each piece. Incredible, he murmured, running his hand over the ebony table. It's alive. That evening, over dinner, Eleanor asked, tell us the story, not just of the wood, but of you. Why this work? Matthew took a deep breath. It started with my grandfather. He built things that lasted, not just furniture, but memories. When I lost my workshop, ... double quotes. He paused, the memory still raw. I thought it was the end, but it was a beginning. I realized I wasn't just making objects. I was making connections between past and present, between nature and craft, between people. Clara added, each piece has a story. The oak came from a tree that survived a tornado, the cherry from an orchard that fed a town, the ebony. Well, that's a story of resilience, growing where nothing else could. Richard leaned forward. You're not just selling furniture, Matthew. You're selling meaning. In a world of disposable everything, that's rare. Eleanor nodded. We want to invest, not just in this set, but in you. We have connections, galleries, collectors. Let us help you grow. Matthew felt a surge of excitement and fear. I don't know. We're still finding our way. Think about it, Eleanor said. No pressure. But know this, what you're doing matters. Back in Cedar Ridge, the barn felt different after New York. Bigger, fuller of possibility, but also heavier with expectation. Matthew called a team meeting. Eleanor Vance offered to introduce us to galleries, collectors. It could mean national exposure. Jake's eyes widened. That's amazing. Mia frowned. But what about our local clients? The people here who supported us from the start. Matthew had worried about that. We won't forget them. But we need to grow, to reach more people. Horace arrived unexpectedly, holding a newspaper. Saw this? He said, pointing to an article in the Cedar Ridge Gazette. Local carpenter makes big in NYC. Matthew winced. It's a bit much. Horace smiled. Publicity is good, but remember what I said about forcing growth. Don't chase fame. Chase, meaning the challenge of scale. As orders poured in, Matthew struggled to maintain quality. They hired 2 more carpenters, but training them took time. Mistakes happened. A misaligned joint, a botched finish. Matthew found himself working late into the night, fixing errors, redoing pieces. One evening, Clara found him staring at a ruined mahogany desk. Matt, you can't do this alone. You need systems, processes. He sighed. I know, but how do you systemize art? How do you teach someone to feel the wood? You teach them the principles, she said. The why behind the what. Then you trust them. So Matthew created a manual, not just technical instructions, but philosophy. Pages on listening to the grain, the story in every scar, honor the material. He held workshops teaching not just technique, but mindset. Slowly, the team transformed. They began to see themselves not as workers, but as storytellers, as guardians of legacy. The temptation. 6 months after the New York trip, Matthew received an email that changed everything. It was from Luxury Living, a high-end furniture chain with stores across the country. Dear Mr. Benny, we've been following your work with great interest. Your approach craftsmanship with narrative is exactly what the luxury market craves. We'd like to discuss a partnership, exclusive distribution rights, significant investment. Let's talk. Matthew's heart raced. This was it. The big time. Financial security. Expansion beyond his wildest dreams. He shared the email with Clara that night. This could solve everything, he said. We could hire more people, buy better equipment, secure our future. Clara was quiet. What would they want in return? Exclusive rights, mass production under my name. He saw her expression. What's wrong? Matt, think about it. Mass production. That's the opposite of everything you've built. Your pieces are special because they're not mass-produced, because they have your hands on them. Your story. He hadn't considered that. But we could reach so many more people. ... At what cost? She asked gently. Would it still be your story? Or would it become theirs? The decision. Matthew drove to Horace's estate, a sprawling property on the edge of town. Horace was in his workshop, restoring an antique loom. Matthew, Horace said, looking up. You've got that, look, the one that says you're standing at a crossroads? Matthew told him about the offer. It's everything I thought I wanted. But Clara's right. It feels ... wrong. Horace set down his tools. Son, the world will tell you that bigger is better, that more is more. But that's a lie. Better is better, meaning is more. He picked up a piece of wood from the workbench. This is apple from a tree my grandmother planted. It's not worth much, but to me, it's priceless. Because it's mine. It's her. Matthew understood. If I take this deal, I lose control. I lose the story. I lose me. Horace nodded. Scale doesn't have to mean selling out. It can mean scaling impact, finding new ways to share your message without compromising your values. The counteroffer. Matthew spent a week crafting a response to luxury living. He didn't say no. He said ... Not this way. Dear Ms. Reynolds, thank you for your offer. I'm honored by your interest in my work. However, I cannot agree to mass production or exclusive distribution. My pieces are born from a relationship with the wood client, with the story they tell. That relationship cannot be replicated in a factory, but I am open to collaboration. One, propose a curated collection, 10 pieces a year, designed by me, crafted by my team, each with a documented story. These would be sold exclusively through your stores at a premium price. In return, you invest in a training program here in Cedar Ridge, teaching young artisans the craft of meaningful woodworking. This way, we grow without losing our soul. We scale impact, not just production. Let me know your thoughts. Sincerely, Matthew Bennett. He hit send, his hands trembling de his pensée. 3 days later, the reply came. Matthew, your proposal is ... unexpected, but intriguing. We'd like to discuss it further. When can you meet? Regards, Evelyn Reynolds, CEO. Matthew smiled. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was a conversation. That evening, as he locked up the barn, he noticed Mia working late, carving an intricate design into a jewelry box. Shouldn't you be home? Matthew asked. Mia looked up, her face glowing. I wanted to get this right. It's for my sister's wedding. The design is our family, crest vines for strength, flowers for new beginnings. Matthew felt a swell of pride. This was it. This was the scale he wanted. Not more pieces, but more meaning. More artisans like Mia pouring their hearts into their work. More stories told in wood. He looked at the barn, quiet now, bathed in moonlight. It wasn't just a workshop. It was a movement, one piece at a time. And as he walked to his truck, Matthew Bennett knew the true grain of truth wasn't in the wood. It was in the why. The Carpenter's legacy. The first frost of November painted Cedar Ridge in silver as Matthew stood before the barn, his breath fogging in the crisp air. Inside, the scent of cedar and tung oil mingled with the earthy aroma of fresh coffee. Clara's ritual for the team's morning huddle. 6 months had passed since his counteroffer to luxury living, and the barn had transformed into a bustling hub of creativity and purpose. Matthew ran his fingers over the workbench where he'd sketched the storyteller's table a year ago. Now, that same surface held blueprints for something far more ambitious. The Bennett Legacy School of Craftsmanship. Horace's words echoed in his mind. Scale impact, not production. This school was his answer. Morning, everyone. Matthew called us Jake, Mia, and 2 new apprentices, Liam, a former Marine seeking purpose, and Priya, an engineering student drawn to artisanal work, gathered around. Today's not just about building furniture, it's about building futures. Clara projected a rendering onto the barn wall, a timber-framed addition to the barn, with large windows overlooking the valley, workstations for 12 students, and a gallery space. The school opens in March, she announced. We've got 20 applications already. Matthew's chest swelled, but beneath the pride, a current of anxiety flowed. Could he teach what he'd spent a lifetime learning? Could he scale his vision without diluting it? The New York Summit. 2 weeks later, Matthew and Clara flew to New York to meet with Evelyn Reynolds, CEO of Luxury Living. Her office towered over Central Park, all glass and Steeler's stark contrast to the barn's warmth. Evelyn, a woman in her 50s with a razor-sharp, bobbin eyes that missed nothing, gestured to 2 chairs. Matthew, Clara. "Your proposal intrigued me," she began, steepling her fingers. "A curated collection. A training program. It's unorthodox." Matthew leaned forward. "Mass production would destroy what makes the work special. Each piece must carry intention. Story." Evelyn tapped a pen on her desk. "My board wants volume. Profit margins. You're offering ... poetry." Clara spoke softly. "Poetry sells, Evelyn. Your clients crave authenticity. They want to feel connected to what they buy. Matthew's work gives them that." Evelyn studied them. "Fine, we'll try it your way. 10 pieces a year. But they must be exceptional. And the school," Matthew's voice steadied, "it's non-negotiable. For every piece sold through Luxury Living, 5% funds, scholarships, will train the next generation of artisans." A slow smile spread across Evelyn's face. "You drive a hard bargain, Bennett. But I respect that. We'll draft the contracts." As they left the skyscraper, Clara squeezed Matthew's hand. "You did it." He gazed at the park below, where autumn leaves swirled like confetti. "Did I? Or did I just trade one cage for another?" Breaking ground. December arrived with snow and purpose. Matthew, Horace, and the team stood in a cleared field beside the barn, shovels in hand. Horace, now 80 but still vigorous, had donated the land. "The school," Horace said, his voice thick with emotion, "isn't just about wood. It's about words, about showing young people that their hands can build more than objects. They can build dignity." Matthew drove the first shovel into the frozen earth. As the others joined in, he thought of his grandfather, Samuel, who'd once told him, "The best legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you plant in others." By March, the timber frame structure stood proud against the Ohio sky. Inside, workbenches gleamed under pendant lights. Tools hung in perfect order. On opening day, 15 students sat at attention, their eyes bright with hope. Matthew stood before them, a slab of walnut on his workbench. "This wood," he began, "was once a tree that weathered storms. It has scars, knots, imperfections. So do we. Our job isn't to hide those flaws. It's to honor them, to shape them into something strong, beautiful." He picked up a chisel. "Today, we start learning how to listen." The first collection. Summer brought the launch of the Legacy Collection for Luxury Living. 10 pieces, each a masterpiece. A dining table of reclaimed barnwood, a desk of spalted maple, a bed frame of cherry with inlaid constellations. Matthew designed each piece, but his team built them. Jake crafting the table's trestle base, Mia carving the constellations, Liam and Priya finishing the circle. The collection debuted in Luxury Living's flagship stores in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Prices started at $25,000. Matthew held his breath. Then the orders came. Not just 1 or 2, but wait. A tech CEO in Silicon Valley bought the Constellation bed for his daughter. A Hollywood director commissioned the Barnwood table for his mountain home. A hedge fund manager in Chicago ordered the maple desk for his office. By August, the collection had grossed $1.2 million. Matthew wired the first scholarship funds to the school. The cracks appear. Success brought pressure. Luxury living demanded more pieces. Clients wanted customizations. The school students struggled to keep up with Matthew's standards. One evening, Matthew found Priya weeping at her workbench. A jewelry box she'd spent weeks on had split along a joint. "I ruined it," she whispered. "I'm not good enough." Matthew knelt beside her. "Show me." Priya held out the box. The wood was Brazilian rosewood, expensive and unforgiving. "I rushed the glue up. The humidity, ... Matthew examined the split. "It's repairable, but more importantly, it's teachable." He called the students together. "This," he said, holding the box, "is why we measure twice, cut once. Why we respect the wood. Why we never rush." He spent the next 3 hours teaching them advanced joinery techniques. By midnight, Priya's box was whole again, stronger than before. Horace's warning. In September, Horace visited the school. He watched Matthew coaching a student on dovetail joints. His voice patient, his hands sure. Afterward, they sat on the porch as dusk painted the sky purple. "You're building something good here, son," Horace said, "but don't lose yourself in it." Matthew frowned. "What do you mean?" Horace gestured to the barn, now dwarfed by the new school building. "This place used to be your sanctuary. Now it's an empire. Empires need kings. You were meant to be a craftsman." Matthew bristled. "I'm still a craftsman. I'm just ... more out of you." Horace's gaze was piercing. "When was the last time you built something with your own hands? Something not for a client or a collection, but for joy?" Matthew opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't remember. Breaking point. October brought a crisis. Luxury Living's flagship store in Chicago requested a last-minute piece for a wealthy Clienta conference table of rare zebra wood due in 6 weeks. Matthew agreed, overruling Clara's concerns. The pressure-mounted zebra wood was notoriously difficult to work with, prone to splintering, unpredictable in grain. Matthew pushed his team, working nights and weekends. Tensions flared. Jake snapped at Liam over a misaligned corner. Mia, exhausted, botched a finish. 2 weeks before the deadline, disaster struck. The tabletop split along a seam. Matthew stared at the ruined wood, his heart pounding. $15,000 in materials, dozens of hours of labor, all wasted. He called Evelyn. "I can't deliver it," he said, his voice hollow. The wood failed. Silence. Then, "The client is furious, Matthew. This damages our partnership." "I'll make it right," Matthew promised. "I'll build something else, something better." "How?" Evelyn's voice was cold. "You're out of time, out of material." Matthew hung up, despair washing over him. Hida failed. Failed his team. Failed Horace. Failed himself. The return. That night, Matthew drove to the old Bennett homestead now owned by a cousin. The original workshop where his grandfather and father had worked stood empty, cobwebs clinging to the rafters. He pushed open the door. The scent of dust and memory filled his lungs. There, in the corner, stood his grandfather's workbench, scarred and stained. On it lay a half-finished rocking horse, Samuel's last project. Matthew ran his hands over the horse's rough mane. He remembered his grandfather's voice. "Wood forgives, son, if you listen." He picked up a chisel. For the first time in months, he worked not for a client or a deadline, but for himself. He shaped the horse's legs, carved its mane, sanded its body until it gleamed. As he worked, the tension in his shoulders eased, the anxiety in his chest quieted. By dawn, the rocking horse was complete, simple, perfect. The solution. Matthew returned to school at sunrise, the rocking horse in his truck. He gathered his team. "I made a mistake," he said. "I chased perfection instead of purpose. I forgot why we do this." He held up the rocking horse. "This is for Sophie, but it's also for us." A reminder? Then he outlined a new plan. They'd build the Chicago client a table not of zebrawood, but of reclaimed oak from a local barn. It would tell a story of resilience, of community, and they'd build it together as a team. Jake spoke up. "We can do it, but we'll need help." "Then we'll ask for it," Matthew said. He called Horace. "I need your crew and your barn wood." Horace arrived an hour later with 3 carpenters and a truckload of weathered oak. "This wood," Horace said, patting a beam, "comes from my first barn. It's seen blizzards, droughts, the Great Depression. It's strong." For the next 2 weeks, the barn buzzed with energy. Matthew, his team, Horace's crew, and even the school students worked side by side. They planed the oak, cut the joinery, assembled the table. At night, they shared meals and stories. When the table was done, it was a masterpiece. The oak's grain flowed like a river, its knots and scars telling tales of survival. Matthew inlaid a copper river down the center, symbolizing continuity. The delivery. Matthew and Jake drove the table to Chicago. The client, a retired neurosurgeon, ran his hands over the surface. "It's alive," he murmured. "I can feel the history in it." Matthew explained the wood's origin, the collaborative effort, the symbolism. The surgeon listened, then nodded. "It's worth more than any zebrawood table. Ite hasso." As they left, Jake clapped Matthew on the back. "We did it." Matthew smiled. "No, they did it." He gestured to the team waiting outside. "All of us, the legacy." December arrived, and with it, the school's first graduation. 15 students received certificates, their faces glowing with pride. Priya, now teaching a class on sustainable materials, presented Matthew with a gift. A box made of scrap wood from every project they'd completed. Inside, letters from the students. Liam's read, "You taught me that honor isn't in the rank but in the work." Priya's, "You showed me that engineering and art aren't enemies, they're partners." Matthew's eyes blurred. He'd set out to build furniture. Instead, he'd built people. That evening, he sat with Clara and Sophie on the porch of their home, now fully renovated thanks to the school's success. Sophie rocked on a horse her grandfather had carved. "Daddy," she said, "will you teach me to build things?" Matthew's heart swelled. "When you're ready." Clara squeezed his hand. "You've built more than a business, Matt. You've built a legacy." Matthew looked at the school, illuminated against the night sky. He thought of Horace, his grandfather, his father. He thought of the team, the students, the clients who'd become friends. The true measure of wealth wasn't in bank accounts or square footage. It was in the lives you touched, the stories you told, the future you planted. As snow began to fall, Matthew Bennett knew. His hands had built more than furniture. They'd built a movement, one piece at a time, one heart at a time. And that was the richest legacy of all. The measure of a man. The first light of dawn painted Cedar Ridge in hues of honey and lavender as Matthew Bennett stood on the porch of the Bennett Legacy School of Craftsmanship. Below him, the valley stirred smoke curled from chimneys. Headlights traced the highway, and the distant chug of a freight train echoed like a heartbeat. It had been 5 years since that crushing notice of eminent domain. 5 years since Horace Whitmore's napkin changed everything. Now, the school stood as a testament to resilience. Timber beams salvaged from Ohio barns, floors milled from fallen storm trees, windows framing the same hills his grandfather had gazed upon. Matthew's hands, though still calloused, now bore new mark-ink stains from signing contracts, calluses from shaking hands with dignitaries, and a thin silver scar on his right palm from a chisel sleep. While teaching Liam to respect the grain, he ran those hands over the porch railing, crafted by the first graduating class. Each notch told a story. Priya's precise joinery, Jake's bold curves, Liam's sturdy pegs. The school wasn't just buildings. It was a living archive of human potential. Inside, Clara was arranging photos for the school's 5th anniversary gala. Images lined the walls. Liam teaching veterans to craft canes, Mia's furniture in a MoMA exhibit, Priya receiving a sustainability award in Washington, D.C. Matthew's gaze lingered on one photo, now 83, surrounded by students, his eyes crinkling as he demonstrated how to listen to a plank of walnut. Horace had passed peacefully 6 months ago, leaving the school his entire estate. His last words to Matthew: "Don't count the money, son. Count the lives." The ripple effect. The gala brought alumni from across the country. In the school's great hall, beneath chandeliers Matthew had forged from recycled horseshoes, stories unfolded like grain in wood. Liam, now 30, ran Wounded Warriors Woodworks in San Diego. His workshop employed disabled veterans, crafting prosthetics and adaptive furniture. "You taught me that scars aren't flaws," he told Matthew, his voice thick. "They're proof we survived." Priya, 28, had launched Sustainable Seams, converting urban wood waste into high-end furniture for tech giants. "Your honor, the material lesson," she said. It's now our company motto. We've saved 50,000 trees from landfills. Mia, 32, was Cedar Ridge's first female city councilor, championing arts education. "This school," she declared during her speech, "isn't just training carpenters, it's building citizens." Matthew watched them, his chest swelling. Yet, beneath the pride, a quiet question gnawed. Had he traded his craft for a cause? The temptation of scale. 3 months later, Evelyn Reynolds visited with an expansion proposal. Luxury Living wanted to franchise the Bennett Legacy model globally schools in Tokyo, Milan, Dubai. "Think of the impact," she urged, spreading blueprints across Matthew's desk. "Hundreds of artisans, thousands of stories." Clara frowned. "Matt, this feels ... industrial, like McDonald's for craftsmanship." Matthew traced the Tokyo school's design. Sleek, modern, soulless. "What about the wood?" he asked. "Local materials, community ties." Evelyn waved a hand. "We'll standardize, use certified sustainable timber. Efficiency is key." That night, Matthew couldn't sleep. He drove to Horace's old workshop, now preserved as a museum. There, under a single bare bulb, sat Samuel Bennett's original workbench. Matthew ran his hands over its surface gouges from chisels, rings from coffee cups, the faint imprint of his grandfather's palm. A note lay tucked in a drawer. "Son, big trees have deep roots. Don't forget where yours are planted." The reckoning. At the next board meeting, Matthew stood before Evelyn, Clara, and 3 luxury living executives. "I appreciate the vision," he began, "but we'll decline the global franchise." Murmurs rippled through the room. Evelyn's expression hardened. "Matthew, this is short-sighted. Think of the revenue." Matthew's voice steadied. "Horace Whitmore left this school a trust fund. We don't need investors. We need integrity." He unveiled his counter-proposal: 1 new U.S. school every 2 years in communities needing economic revival, partnerships with local sawmills using regional woods, apprenticeships for at-risk youth, funded by 10% of Luxury Living Spinet collection profits. Clara added, "We'll grow deed, not wide, like oak trees." Evelyn studied the plan. "It's boutique, but I admire the conviction. We'll support it with conditions." She paused. "Matthew, you must step back. Be the face, not the foreman. Delegate." Matthew tensed. Delegate his craft, his connection to the wood, the master's retreat. Following Evelyn's advice, Matthew took a sabbatical. He and Clara rented a cabin in Montana's Bitterroot Valley, surrounded by wilderness. 4 weeks, he hiked, fished, and stared at mountains older than memory. One evening, carving a spoon from lodgepole pine, he realized he hadn't built anything with his own hands in months. He called Jake, now the school's director. "How's the Nashville site?" "Good," Jake said. "But we miss you, Matt. The students ask when the old man will teach again." Matthew smiled. "Tell them I'm learning something new. How to let go." The fire. 6 months into his sabbatical, disaster struck. Lightning ignited a blaze in the original Cedar Ridge barn. Matthew flew home to find smoldering ruins. The fire had consumed the workshop, the gallery, and half the school. Only Horace's preserved workshop and the new timber frame edition survived. As Matthew sifted through ashes, his heart broke. Charred fragments of the storyteller's table, burned tools, melted bronze plaques bearing alumni names. Clara found him kneeling in the soot. "Matt, it's just things." "No," he whispered, holding a warped chisel. "It's history, legacy." Then he saw it. Beneath a fallen beam, a stack of journals his grandfather's, his father's, his own, waterlogged, but intact. Inside, Samuel's first entry, October 12, 1962. "Built a cradle today for the widow Miller's boy. Wood is honest. It gives what you put into it. The rebirth, the community veterans from Liam's program drove cross-country with tools. Priya's company donated reclaimed timber. Luxury Living funded reconstruction." Matthew, however, did something unexpected. He announced the new school would be built by hand, no power tools, no cranes, using only axes, adzes, and handsaws. He and the students would raise a timber frame structure, just as his grandfather had done in 1962. "It'll take years," Clara protested. "Good," Matthew replied. "Some things aren't meant to be rushed." The project became a pilgrimage. People came from across America to swing a maul, shape a beam, or simply watch. Matthew taught them the old ways: how to hew a log flat, how to cut a mortise, and tenon joint baya, how to raise a frame with ropes and muscle. One crisp October morning, as they lifted the final ridge beam into place, Matthew spotted Sophie, now 12, among the crowd. She'd carved her name into the wood. Es Barrio 2029. The true measure. 5 years later, the Bennett Legacy School stood fully restored, its timber frame a monument to patience. Matthew, now 50, spent his days teaching, writing, and occasionally crafting a piece for pure joy. One afternoon, as he demonstrated dovetail joints to a new class, a student asked, "Mr. Bennett, are you rich?" Matthew smiled, setting down his chisel. "Let me show you something." He led them to Horace's workshop. On the wall hung a simple oak plaque. Carved into it were words: "Wealth is not what you gather, it's what you give away." Below it, a running tally. Trees planted, 25,000. Students taught, 412. Veterans employed, 87. Waste diverted, 1.2 million pounds. Matthew touched the plaque. "My grandfather died with $847 in his account, but he built cradles for babies who couldn't they afford them. He taught every kid in town how to handle a hammer. That's wealth." He walked to the window, pointing to the valley. "See that? The mill reopened because we buy local wood. The cafe downtown, run by a grad who saved her tips to buy it. That's wealth." He turned to the students. "Your hands can build more than furniture. They can build futures. That's the richest legacy of all." The final lesson. That evening, Matthew sat on his porch with Clara, watching fireflies flicker like scattered stars. Sophie, now in college, called from Stanford. "Dad, my professor loved your wood as metaphor thesis. She wants to publish it." Matthew laughed. "Tell her to add this: the strongest trees bend in storms but don't break." After hanging up, Clara took his hand. "You did it, Matt. You built something eternal." Matthew looked toward the school, glowing softly in the twilight. He thought of Horace, his grandfather, his father. He thought of Liam, Priya, Mia, and the hundreds of students whose lives had changed course in that barn. He thought of the fire, the ashes, the journals that survived, the words of his grandfather: "Wood is honest. It gives what you put into it." Matthew Bennett had put in sweat, tears, and love. And in return, the wood earned. The world had given him back something far greater than money. They'd given him meaning. As the first star pierced the indigo sky, Matthew whispered to the wind, "I am Hishi." And in the quiet of Cedar Ridge, the tree seemed to whisper back, "We know."